The crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier, catching fragments of light like broken promises. I sat frozen, my hand trembling as I lifted the lid of the velvet box Mason, my father-in-law, had pushed toward me. Inside lay divorce papers, neatly folded, as if they were a gift worth celebrating. My breath caught in my throat. I looked at Timothy, my husband, searching for a protest, a glance, anything. He turned his face away. Then, as if rehearsed, Sharon leaned forward with a smile that cut like glass. "Julia," she said sweetly, "meet Timothy's new wife." The morning of our second anniversary had begun with such promise. I woke before dawn, my body humming with excitement that made sleep impossible. 2 years of marriage. 2 years of building a life with Timothy. Tonight, we would celebrate with everyone who mattered. Family, friends, people whose approval I had worked hard to earn. I slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake Timothy, and padded into the kitchen barefoot. The tiles were cool against my skin. I brewed coffee the way he liked it, strong, with a touch of cream. I whisked eggs for an omelet, crisped turkey bacon, and set out fresh orange juice I'd squeezed the night before. The kitchen filled with the warm scent of butter and vanilla, reminding me of the mornings when we first moved in together, when everything felt new and full of possibility. As I plated his breakfast, I caught sight of our wedding photo on the mantel. The two of us, radiant with joy, frozen in a moment where forever seemed certain. I reached up and touched my ring, spinning the gold band around my finger, a habit I had whenever I needed reassurance. It had molded itself to my hand by now, warm and familiar, almost like part of my skin. "Happy anniversary," I whispered when Timothy finally appeared in the doorway. He didn't come closer. He didn't smile the way he once did. "Yes," he said flatly. 2 years. Then he reached for the newspaper and sat down, his eyes scanning the headlines instead of me. A small ache settled in my chest, but I brushed it aside. Timothy was always quiet in the mornings. Maybe he was just distracted, thinking about the dinner party tonight. Men handled celebrations differently, I told myself. Where I felt excitement, maybe he felt pressure. Later that afternoon, I drove over to Mason and Sharon's house, the grand brick colonial where family gatherings always took place. Their dining room looked like something from a magazine. Crystal glasses, polished silverware, fresh roses in tall vases. Sharon bustled around, giving directions as if I were her assistant. I smiled and followed her lead, determined to be helpful, determined to be accepted. "You seem especially happy today," I said, arranging roses in the vase she handed me. "Oh, Julia," she replied, her smile wider than usual. "Tonight will be such a relief. We've been waiting for this moment." I didn't understand what she meant, but I laughed politely and went back to straightening napkins. Mason, sitting in his leather armchair, nodded with the air of a man who always knew more than anyone else. By the time I returned home to change, the house smelled faintly of roses, the same ones I had carried to Sharon's dining table. I slipped into a navy blue dress Timothy once told me was his favorite. I fastened the small gold necklace my mother had given me when I married. Her way of reminding me that love, at least once, had been steady and strong in her life. I stood before the mirror, smoothing the fabric over my waist, imagining the evening ahead. Laughter, wine glasses clinking, stories told around the table, perhaps even a toast from Timothy, something that would remind me he still saw me, still cherished me. I wanted so badly for the night to feel like a celebration. I wanted to believe the small cracks I had noticed in our marriage. His distance, his distracted silences, were nothing more than passing shadows. I took one last look at my reflection. My face glowed with a mixture of hope and nerves. Then I whispered to myself, almost like a prayer, "Tonight will be beautiful." 3 weeks before the anniversary dinner, I was in our home office sorting through a pile of documents for tax season. I like to keep things organized, files neatly stacked, papers labeled in folders. Timothy always said I was meticulous to a fault. That afternoon, I found something that didn't belong. A cell phone bill. Not for our shared account. A separate line. I frowned, flipping through the pages. Hundreds of text messages, dozens of late-night calls. The times leapt off the page. Midnight conversations when Timothy had been lying beside me. Afternoon calls during work hours when he said he couldn't be reached. weekend texts while he sat across the room from me, his eyes on his laptop, claiming he was answering work emails. My hands shook as I read. I felt a cold ripple spread through my body, like ice creeping across a pond. That evening, I laid the papers out on the kitchen counter like evidence in a courtroom. When Timothy walked in, loosening his tie, I asked, "Can you explain this to me?" His face shifted through confusion, guilt, and then anger. "You went through my personal papers." "They were mixed with our tax documents," I said. My voice was steadier than I felt. "I wasn't snooping." "It's work-related," he snapped. "My boss requires a separate line for confidential projects." "Your boss requires you to text at midnight?" I asked quietly. His jaw tightened. "You're being paranoid, Julia. This constant suspicion is exactly why we have problems." The word hit me like a blow. Problems. As if our marriage was already broken, and I was only now being informed. "What problems?" I whispered. He grabbed his keys. "I need air. I need space. I can't be interrogated in my own home." And then the door slammed, leaving me with the bills spread across the counter and a hollow space where trust used to live. 2 days later, at the grocery store, I met her. I was choosing vegetables when I felt someone watching me. A young woman, beautiful in the effortless way that made me instantly conscious of my hair, my plain sweater, the tired lines around my eyes. "You must be Julia," she said nervously, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her purse. "Yes. I'm Judith. I work with Timothy. He's mentioned you." I tried to hide my surprise. Timothy rarely spoke about his colleagues at home, and he had certainly never mentioned Judith. She glanced around, as if worried someone might see us talking. "He told me about your anniversary party. It sounds lovely." My stomach twisted. Timothy had acted almost annoyed whenever I brought up the dinner. Why would he discuss it with her? "How thoughtful of him," I said carefully. "To talk about our marriage at work." Judith's smile faltered. "Oh, he doesn't really discuss your marriage. He talks about other things, personal things." She stopped herself, as though she had said too much. "I should go. It was nice meeting you, Julia." I stood frozen in the produce aisle, questions multiplying like weeds. Personal things. Things he couldn't share with me but could confide in her. The following Sunday, we had dinner with Mason and Sharon. What I had once considered mild disapproval now revealed itself as something sharper. Systematic evaluation. Sharon carved the roast, her smile too polished. "Margaret's daughter just had the most beautiful baby," she announced. "Such a blessing. Grandchildren bring such joy." Her eyes flicked meaningfully to my stomach. "The Johnsons are expecting their second grandchild," she continued. "The Pattersons just welcomed their third. It seems everyone our age is enjoying the fruits of successful marriages." Mason set down his fork with deliberate precision. Successful marriages typically produce children within the first year. It demonstrates compatibility, shared values, biological fitness. I stared at my plate, cheeks burning. Timothy sat in silence, not once stepping in to defend me. His silence was louder than their words. I excused myself to the bathroom and pressed my back against the door, tears burning my eyes. Through the thin walls, I heard their voices as if I weren't even human, as if I were an item on a checklist. 2 years should be adequate time, Mason was saying. "Perhaps the problem is more fundamental than we believed," Sharon replied. Timothy's voice was low and distinct. But it wasn't a protest. That night, lying in bed beside him, I stared at the ceiling. The cracks in my marriage were no longer hairline fractures. They were gaping fissures. And I was standing on a fault line, waiting for the ground beneath me to give way. The restaurant smelled of roasted garlic and butter, the kind of scent that should have comforted me. But instead it turned my stomach. Timothy walked beside me, crisp in his navy suit, but his hand never reached for mine. Not once. I kept adjusting the strap of my dress, wishing he'd notice how carefully I had chosen it. Deep green silk that caught the light. He didn't. His parents were already seated at the long table near the window. Mason and Sharon looked regal in their way, both dressed in muted tones that suggested sophistication without joy. Mason rose when he saw us, but his smile was thin, almost rehearsed. "Happy anniversary," Sharon said, her voice like porcelain, fragile but cutting. She leaned forward, kissed my cheek perfunctorily, then turned immediately to her son. Timothy, you've lost weight. Are you eating properly? I pulled out my own chair, trying not to flinch at the dismissal. Julia, Mason said, nodding. I trust you're well. I am, I replied. My voice sounded small against the clatter of silverware and murmured conversations in the dining room. A waiter poured wine, and I tried to calm my nerves. The glass trembled slightly in my hand. Maybe this will be different, I told myself. Maybe tonight will be normal. Maybe they've planned something kind. But deep down, I already knew better. The first course arrived, soup served in delicate white bowls. Sharon dabbed her napkin, her eyes sharp as she looked at me. You're still not expecting then? She asked casually, as if discussing the weather. My spoon froze halfway to my mouth. Timothy cleared his throat but said nothing. I suppose it's modern now, Mason added, cutting a piece of bread. Couples delaying family. But 2 years is a long time. People will start to ask questions. They already are, Sharon murmured. I placed my spoon down gently. With respect, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Our family planning is our business. Sharon's eyebrows arched, amused. Of course, dear. Of course. We only worry because, well, the future of the family must be secured. Her words lingered like smoke. I glanced at Timothy, waiting for him to speak. To defend me. He kept his eyes on his plate. The main course was served, steak, perfectly seared, juices glistening. But I couldn't eat. I picked at the asparagus, my chest tightening with each minute. I noticed the way Sharon kept her gaze trained on me, and Mason's barely disguised impatience whenever I answered a question. At one point, Sharon leaned toward Timothy and whispered something. He gave a short nod, almost imperceptible, as though agreeing to an arrangement already decided. My blood ran cold. The air felt heavy, suffocating. The hum of the restaurant blurred around me. I had the distinct sense that I was on stage, the lone character unaware of the script. When the plates were cleared and dessert menus offered, Mason waved them away. We have something to present, he said, his voice calm, deliberate. Sharon smiled, and it wasn't kind. An anniversary gift, she announced, sliding an envelope across the table. I frowned, reaching for it. The paper was thick, official. My hands shook as I pulled out the contents. Divorce papers. The room tilted. My pulse thundered in my ears. Words blurred on the page, but the meaning was unmistakable. What is this? My voice cracked, too loud. A few heads from nearby tables turned. Mason folded his hands. It is what it looks like. Timothy deserves a wife who can provide him with children, stability, and the proper standing. You have failed in that regard. I stared at Timothy. You knew about this? He didn't meet my eyes. It's for the best, Julia. Sharon's hand rested on his arm, almost possessively. We've already arranged everything. The transition will be smooth. No need for theatrics. Then, as if the cruelty wasn't sharp enough, Mason gestured toward the entrance. A young woman walked in, Judith. Dressed in pale blue, her expression both nervous and triumphant. She avoided my gaze, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Meet Timothy's new fiancé, Sharon said, her smile a perfect dagger. I felt my body go numb. The clinking glasses, the laughter from other tables, the soft piano music, all of it faded into a dull roar. I was invisible, erased, discarded like a placeholder. But through the blur of humiliation, something inside me hardened. A spark of clarity cut through the fog. My fingers brushed against my own envelope, tucked discreetly in my handbag. The one I had prepared in silence. They thought they were ending me, but they had no idea what was coming. That night, after the dinner, I sat on the edge of my bed in silence. The silk dress clung to me, wrinkled from the evening, carrying the faint scent of perfume and betrayal. Timothy was in the guest room. He hadn't even bothered to pretend anymore. I could hear him moving, drawers opening, the muffled vibration of his phone as he texted her. My hands still trembled. Divorce papers. Served like a dessert course. Every time I blinked, I saw Sharon's smirk, Mason's calm authority, Judith's pale blue dress. And Timothy, my husband, silent, complicit, already gone. I pulled off my earrings, setting them on the nightstand. They looked absurd, glittering as if this had been a celebration. I felt sick. I wanted to tear the dress from my body, burn it, erase the memory of sitting at that table while strangers watched my life disintegrate. Instead, I sat frozen, staring at nothing. Sleep didn't come. At 2 a.m., I paced the hallway barefoot, the wooden floor cold beneath my feet. I paused at the window, looking out into the street, quiet, still indifferent. How many other women were awake right now, carrying betrayals they couldn't speak aloud? My mind spun in circles. Maybe I should just sign. Maybe I should vanish quietly. Let them have their perfect, fertile daughter-in-law. But the thought made bile rise in my throat. Why should I be the one to leave shamed, broken? Why should I carry their verdict like a scarlet letter? I thought of every dinner where Sharon had measured my worth by the state of my womb. Every holiday where Mason discussed legacy, as though I were a defective piece of machinery. Every time Timothy had let their words hang in the air, unchallenged, while I swallowed my dignity in silence. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass of the window, tears slipping down my cheeks. No more. At dawn, I brewed coffee I didn't drink. My hands shook too much to hold the cup steady. The house was quiet, except for Timothy's muffled laughter from the guest room. I stood in the kitchen listening, and something inside me snapped. Not in rage. Not in hysteria. In clarity. I remembered my father's voice, years ago before he passed. Julia, when people try to define your worth, they're really showing you theirs. Never forget that. I had forgotten. I had allowed myself to shrink, to apologize for existing, to bend into smaller and smaller shapes until I nearly disappeared. No more. I wiped my face with the back of my hand and pulled out the envelope I had prepared weeks ago. The one they hadn't seen yet. It had sat in my handbag like a silent promise, waiting for the right moment. It wasn't rage that guided me when I began writing my plan in a notebook that morning. It was something quieter, steadier, resolve. The days that followed blurred into one another, but I remember the sleepless nights most vividly. I would lie awake, the ceiling above me glowing faintly from the streetlights outside, my body rigid with exhaustion. My thoughts replayed the dinner in painful detail, but now the humiliation slowly gave way to analysis. I examined every expression, every word, every slip of the tongue. Timothy had said, "It's for the best." Sharon had said, "The transition will be smooth." Mason had said, "You have failed." Their confidence came from believing I was powerless. They thought I was too broken, too dependent, too invisible to fight back. Each night, I repeated their words until they lost their sting and became something else, fuel. One night, around 3 a.m., I rose from bed and began sorting through old boxes in the study. Bank statements, property documents, business papers Mason had once asked Timothy to store for safekeeping. I handled each page carefully, my breath slow, my hands steady. Here, among the stacks, were threads of truth they never expected me to touch. I didn't understand everything yet, but I knew enough to feel the tremor of possibility. By the time the sun rose, my dining table was covered in files, highlighted lines, sticky notes. My coffee was cold, untouched. And for the first time in weeks, I felt alive. There were setbacks, of course. Days when I doubted myself. When Sharon's voice echoed in my mind, calling me inadequate. When Timothy's absence in the house gnawed at me. His toothbrush gone, his closet half empty, his laughter belonging to someone else. But each doubt was followed by a stubborn whisper inside me. Stand up. Don't fold. I began carrying the envelope with me everywhere. Not as a weapon yet, but as a talisman. A reminder that I wasn't cornered. That silence could be power. I didn't know when the moment would come. But I knew this. When it did, I would not be the one sitting small at the table anymore. That was the turning point. The Julia who had entered that restaurant on her anniversary had been uncertain, hopeful, desperate for approval. The Julia now pacing her hallway at dawn was different. Bruised, yes. Humiliated, yes. But underneath the ache, a new steel had formed. They wanted me erased. Instead, I would make myself unforgettable. The morning after I filled the dining table with files, I sat with a notebook and began sorting through what I had. There were bank statements that didn't match Timothy's salary. Deposits far larger than what he earned. Some were marked under Mason's company name. Others came from accounts I didn't recognize. Transfers hidden in plain sight. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Maybe it was complicated business I didn't understand. But the numbers repeated across months, quiet and deliberate. Not mistakes, patterns. My hands trembled as I circled them in red pen. Mason, so proud of his legacy, had secrets stitched into the very fabric of his wealth. I tried to call a lawyer the next day. Her office was sleek, professional, smelling faintly of lemon polish and coffee. She listened carefully, her glasses low on her nose as I explained the dinner, the papers, the young woman. When I slid the file of bank statements across her desk, her eyebrows arched. "Where did you get these?" "They were in our house. Timothy stored them." She flipped through the pages, her lips tightening. "These suggest tax evasion. Possibly offshore accounts. But unless you can prove your legal access, this could backfire. They could accuse you of theft." My chest tightened. "So I can't use them?" "Not yet," she said gently. "Not without more. You'll need corroboration. Something undeniable. And Julia, men like Mason don't fall easily. They protect their image at all costs." I left her office with the weight of both hope and despair pressing down on me. Hope that I had stumbled onto something real. Despair that I might not have the strength to pull it through. That night, doubt crept back in. I sat on the floor of my bedroom. Papers spread around me, my heart heavy. Maybe Sharon was right. Maybe I had failed. Maybe I was holding on to scraps of dignity that wouldn't matter in the end. Timothy came by briefly to collect more clothes. He didn't knock, just walked in. His cologne filled the hallway, once familiar, now foreign. "Julia," he said briskly, "you should sign the papers. The sooner we move on, the better." I stared at him from the doorway. "Did you ever love me?" He shifted, uncomfortable. "This isn't about love. It's about compatibility. Future. My parents are right. We need a new path." "A new path with Judith," I said bitterly. He didn't deny it. Just sighed. As if I were the unreasonable one. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." As he left, I realized something. Timothy wasn't cruel, not in the way his parents were. He was weak. Too weak to stand against them. Too weak to fight for me. That weakness was their weapon. And now mine. The following week, I confided in my best friend Elena. She had been my rock since university. A woman with sharp instincts and a sharper tongue. She sat across my kitchen table, sipping tea. Eyes narrowed as I laid out the documents. "They tried to humiliate you in public?" she said, incredulous. "And they think you'll just crawl away?" "They think I'm finished," I admitted softly. Elena tapped the papers. "Then let's finish them instead." Her certainty steadied me. "But I don't know how." "You don't need to know everything," she cut in. "You just need to know where they're vulnerable. And this," she pointed at the circled deposits, "is a fracture line." We spent hours combing through records, piecing together timelines, cross-checking details. It was exhausting, frustrating. Some nights I collapsed into bed convinced it was hopeless. Other nights I stayed awake until dawn, chasing threads of numbers and names. Every setback felt like a test. But each small discovery reignited the fire. One night, buried in old files, I found something that made me sit up straight. A property deed. Not in Mason's name, not in Timothy's, but in Judith's. The date was recent. Too recent. Elena's eyes widened when she saw it. "He's already transferring assets. They're preparing her as the legal heir." The betrayal cut deeper than anything Sharon had ever said. Judith wasn't just the replacement wife. She was the vessel for their empire. "They mean to erase me entirely," I whispered. Elena leaned forward, her voice fierce. "Then don't just fight for yourself. Expose them. Show everyone who they really are." Still fear lingered. What if I failed? What if they crushed me completely? I imagined standing in court. Their lawyers tearing me apart. Timothy watching silently as I was painted bitter, barren, irrelevant. The thought made me shake. But then I remembered that night at the restaurant. Mason's smug certainty, Sharon's polished cruelty, Judith's nervous triumph. I remembered the way I had sat, trembling, humiliated, invisible. And I knew I could never allow them to write the ending of my story. If I was to be erased, it would be by my own hand, rewriting myself into something stronger. So I pressed on. I met with the lawyer again, this time with Elena by my side. I showed her the deed. She studied it silently for a long moment. This, she said finally, changes everything. It ties Timothy's infidelity directly to asset transfers. If presented correctly, it undermines both their financial credibility and their personal reputation. I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time, I saw the outline of a path. Difficult, dangerous, but real. Sharon had once told me that children secured a legacy. She was wrong. Truth did. And I was holding it in my hands. The invitation arrived in the mail 2 weeks later, embossed in gold, thick cardstock. Mason and Sharon were hosting a formal dinner to introduce Judith as Timothy's new partner. I stared at the card in my hands, my stomach twisting. They weren't wasting time. My erasure was to be complete, packaged in elegance and champagne. I placed the invitation on the table, beside my own envelope. The one I had been filling, piece by piece, with documents, statements, and the deed in Judith's name. They wanted a performance. Fine. I would give them one. The evening of the dinner, I dressed carefully. A simple black dress, pearl earrings, no frills. Not the discarded wife, not the jealous woman. Just Julia, calm, unshaken. Elena came with me. "Are you sure you're ready?" she asked as we stood outside the grand estate, light spilling from the tall windows, music drifting into the night. I nodded. My heartbeat was steady. They wanted me silent. Tonight I speak. We walked in together. The ballroom gleamed with chandeliers and polished silver. Guests mingled with glasses of wine. Laughter bouncing off the marble floors. At the center of it all stood Mason and Sharon, regal and composed, Timothy at their side. And Judith, shimmering in a pale gown, her arm linked through Timothy's. For a moment the room tilted. But I straightened my shoulders and stepped forward. "Julia," Sharon said smoothly, her smile thin. "How unexpected." "I came to congratulate you," I replied. My voice was calm, almost gentle. Mason's eyes narrowed. "This evening is a celebration. It would be best if you avoided creating unpleasantness." "Of course," I said. "But before you toast, I thought the guests might appreciate a fuller picture of what they're celebrating." The room quieted. Heads turned. Glasses stilled midair. I reached into my bag and withdrew the envelope. My hands did not shake. I was given divorce papers at my anniversary dinner. I began, my voice clear, carrying through the hall. A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. I was told I had failed this family, that I was being replaced. Sharon's face froze in a polite mask. Mason's jaw tightened. Timothy's color drained. "But failure," I continued, "is a relative thing. You see, while I was being dismissed, I discovered something." I opened the envelope and spread the papers on a nearby table. Guests leaned closer, curiosity piqued. "These are bank records. Transfers, deposits, accounts hidden from the government. Proof of evasion." I lifted another page. "And this," I held up the property deed, "is a house purchased in Judith's name, weeks before my marriage was publicly ended." A murmur swept the room. While I was accused of being unfit, I said steadily, Mason was quietly funneling assets, Timothy was betraying vows, and Sharon was orchestrating the replacement of one woman with another as if marriage were a business contract. Judith's face crumpled. I didn't know." Timothy reached for her hand, but she pulled away, mortified. Mason stepped forward, voice like thunder. "You dare bring this here? These lies?" "They're not lies," I said softly. "They're your signatures. Your transfers. Your deeds." I placed the envelope down firmly. "The authorities already have copies. Tonight is simply courtesy. To let everyone see who you really are." The silence was heavy. Sharon's smile cracked, her poise unraveling. Mason's fury was visible, his hands clenched, veins bulging at his temples. Timothy looked as if the ground had opened beneath him. His carefully constructed world collapsing in front of family, friends, business partners, social allies. And me, small, invisible Julia, stood steady. Elena stepped to my side, her presence solid, unwavering. I met Sharon's eyes. You wanted me erased. Instead, I've written the truth where no one can ignore it. With that, I turned. The sound of whispers followed me through the hall, each one a nail in the coffin of their reputation. I did not look back. The night after the dinner, I woke before dawn again. The house was silent, the kind of silence that feels alive, thick, pressing, waiting. I padded into the kitchen, just as I had on the morning of my anniversary, but this time the air felt different. Lighter. I made coffee slowly, not for Timothy anymore, not to please anyone. Just for myself. The bitter warmth filled my chest as I sat at the table, staring at the soft light breaking through the curtains. My hands no longer sought my wedding ring. The circle of gold had been tucked away in a drawer. For the first time in years, I wasn't spinning it for reassurance. I didn't need it. The fallout came quickly. Mason and Sharon withdrew from public life within weeks, their names whispered at charity events and board meetings. The very people they had wanted to impress with their perfect family image now avoided them. Timothy's career faltered, contracts pulled away from the shadow of scandal. Judith disappeared quietly, her pale figure no longer draped on his arm. I watched it all from a distance. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Their destruction was self-made. All I had done was bring it into the light. Instead, I turned inward. I started working longer hours at the small design studio I had put on hold during my marriage. I let myself get lost in colors and textures, in creating spaces that breathed warmth and beauty. The work felt honest, grounding. Each project reminded me that I had always been capable of building something lasting, something my in-laws had tried to make me forget. Elena stayed by my side. On quiet evenings, she'd bring wine, and we'd sit on the porch, talking about nothing and everything. Sometimes we laughed until our stomachs hurt. Other nights, we simply sat in silence, watching the sky shift from dusk to night, letting the calm settle into our bones. "You look lighter," she told me one evening, her eyes warm. "I feel lighter," I admitted. "It's like I've been carrying a weight I didn't even realize. And now it's gone." I also began to reconnect with my own family, my mother, my siblings. For so long, I had distanced myself, afraid of admitting how badly I was treated in Timothy's world. But when I visited my mother's house, I felt her arms wrap around me, strong and sure, and I knew I was finally safe. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone," she whispered. "Not anymore." Her words sank deep, anchoring me in a way Mason's judgments never could. One afternoon, months later, I found myself in a small bookstore downtown. The scent of old paper filled the air, and I let my fingers trail over spines of novels, poetry, history. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just letting myself wander. That's when I realized. This was freedom. The ability to move through the world without waiting for someone else's approval, without bracing for someone else's disappointment. I could choose where to go, what to read, who to love. And that realization filled me with a quiet, steady joy. On the anniversary of the disastrous dinner, I went for a walk in the park. Leaves crunched beneath my boots, and the air was sharp with autumn. I carried no bitterness with me, no anger. Only clarity. I sat on a bench, watching children play, couples stroll, an old man feed pigeons. Life moved forward, simple and ordinary. I whispered to myself, "I'm still here." The words were not defiant. They were not broken. They were steady, true. I had lost a marriage, but I had gained myself. And in that, there was a kind of victory more lasting than revenge, freedom. Sitting by the window that evening, I watched the last light stretch across the city, soft gold bleeding into gray. The sky was a quiet witness to everything that had happened. The betrayal, the humiliation, the quiet plotting, and finally, the revelation. I traced my fingers along the edge of the envelope I had used that night, now tucked safely in a drawer. It had once been a weapon, a calculated strike against those who sought to erase me. But in its stillness, it had become a symbol of something far larger. The truth I refused to hide, the voice I refused to silence. Life, I realized, is often like a room filled with mirrors. Some reflect joy, some reflect disappointment. And some, like Mason and Sharon's carefully curated facade, distort reality until you question your own reflection. It's easy to forget who you are when the room is full of mirrors pointing in every direction. But when you step back, when you pause, You see yourself clearly. I took a deep breath, smelling the faint aroma of coffee I had made for myself, the quiet warmth of a life reclaimed. For years, I had sought approval, measured my worth in the eyes of others. And yet, all it took was one act of courage, one decision to stand firm, to see that my life was mine, not theirs to judge, manipulate, or discard. I thought of Timothy, of Judith, of Mason and Sharon. Their plans to erase me had crumbled, not because of malice, not because of revenge, but because I held my ground and refused to be invisible. And as I sat there in that calm light, I understood. The most powerful victories are the ones that no one can applaud, that no one can see until you choose to show yourself. The city hummed softly outside, distant and indifferent, as if nothing had changed. Yet inside, everything had changed. I was lighter, clearer, and unafraid. My past would always be a part of me, the betrayal, the humiliation, but it no longer defined me. I had taken the fragments of a broken world and arranged them into something I could live in, something I could breathe in freely. And as the sky deepened to navy, I smiled faintly to myself. I was still here, whole, seen, and for the first time entirely free.